Hare Krishna, dear devotees, we thank you all for being here today. We have a Grace RADHA Devi, who will be speaking the Bhagavatam today. And we are very grateful for her being here today. So without much saying, I'll put the verse on the screen, and Mother Radha will take over the class. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I hope you see the screen. Is it clear for you?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, it's clear. Thank you. Yes. Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you so much for having me here. This morning we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, verse 32. Ete shuti te nipavide gite svaya viprishte chasana tanecha yevai pura brahmana ahatushta aradhito bhagavan vasudeva. And the word for word, ete, all that is described, shruti, way, te, unto you, nipa, O Maharaj Parikshit, Vedagite, according to the version of the Vedas, Tvaya, by your majesty, Apiprishte, being properly inquired, Cha, also, Sanatane, in the matter of eternal truth, Cha, verily, Ye, which, Vai, certainly, Pura, before, Brahmane, unto Lord Brahma, Aha, said, Tushtaha, being satisfied, Araditaha, being worshipped, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Vasudevaha, Lord Krishna. Translation. Your Majesty, Maharaj Parikshit, know that all that I have described in reply to your proper inquiry is just according to the version of the Vedas, and it is eternal truth. This was described personally by Lord Krishna unto Brahma, with whom the Lord was satisfied upon being properly worshipped. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The two different ways of reaching the spiritual sky and thereby getting emancipation from all material bondage, namely, either the direct process of reaching the kingdom of God or the gradual process through the other higher planets of the universe, are set forth exactly according to the version of the Vedas. The Vedic versions in this connection are Yadasabe pramuchyante kamayesya hrideshita atamartyo mrito bhavata artra brahma samasnute, from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 4:4-7, and Te Ruchir Abhisampavad Anti, again from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 6:2-15. Those who are free from all material desires, which are diseases of the heart, are able to conquer death and enter the kingdom of God through the Archie planets. These Vedic versions corroborate the version of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the latter is further confirmed by Shukadeva Goswami, who affirms that the truth was disclosed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, Vasudeva, to Brahma, the first authority on the Vedas. The disciplic succession holds that the Vedas were uttered by Lord Krishna to Brahma, by Brahma to Narada, and by Narada to Vyasadeva, and then by Vyasadeva to Shukadeva Goswami, and so on. So there is no difference between the versions of all the authorities. The truth is eternal, and as such, there cannot be any new opinion about the truth. That is the way of knowing the knowledge contained in the Vedas. It is not a thing to be understood by one's erudite scholarship or by the fashionable interpretations of mundane scholars. There is nothing to be added and nothing to be subtracted, because the truth is the truth. One has to accept, after all, some authority. The modern scientists are also authorities for the common man, for some scientific truths. The common man follows the version of the scientist. This means that the common man follows the authority. The Vedic knowledge is also received in that way. The common man cannot argue about what is beyond the sky or beyond the universe. He must accept the versions of the Vedas as they are understood by the authorized disciplic succession. In the Bhagavad Gita, also, the same process of understanding the Gita is stated in the 4th chapter. If one does not follow the authoritative version of the acharyas, he will vainly search after the truth mentioned in the Vedas. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gyanan Gyanan Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kavadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Panchakalpatarubhyash Chakri Krishnadubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhya Vaishnavebhya Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Hare. So once again, thank you so much for inviting me to contemplate the Bhagavatam with you all. I ask for the blessings of the devotees that I can say something that is helpful in pursuing our spiritual advancement. I always accept these invitations to speak, not because I'm such a great speaker or so enlightened, but because it's a service for the devotees, and also because I learned so much by doing this. This particular verse and this part of the Gita that Srila Prabhupada references talks so much about how important it is for us to study this Vedic knowledge. And it's actually essential to our spiritual advancement. We live in a world that is constantly pushing a particular point of view on us, and that's the material point of view. So it can become very difficult in our daily lives just to even maintain a little bit of spiritual consciousness. I remember Bhakti Tirtha Swami once saying that if you live in a big city, you are bombarded with so much material psychic vibration that chanting 16 rounds per day just gets you back to an even keel. It just keeps you from falling, completely victim to this material consciousness. So it's so important that we study the scriptures, and when we're given the opportunity to write or speak something on what we're reading, it really helps us so much to absorb those lessons. And so for that reason, I encourage all of you as well, to speak when you're given the chance, and if not, to write, we can all write. So as I said, this part of the Bhagavatam is talking about how we receive transcendental knowledge. And the context is, we're discussing how Lord Brahma becomes forgetful. He is the preeminent living entity in our world, right, in our universe. He's so advanced, we can't contemplate how advanced he is. And yet Krishna's material energy is so powerful that even Lord Brahma becomes bewildered, becomes forgetful. So what to speak of us, right? And where does Lord Brahma go, to find shelter from this material energy? Well, there is only one place we can go. It's Krishna, right? And Krishna is the source of Lord Brahma's realization, right? So in this world, again, we're taught that we can rely on the power of our own minds. I am the captain of my soul, right? I am the decider of my fate, right? And if not our own mind, certainly, we are taught that the collective human mind, right, can solve all our problems. But Lord Brahma is giving us the example that no, real knowledge comes from only one place, and that's Krishna. So here in this particular chapter, it's being described how Lord Brahma, lacking, the memory, the consciousness of how to do his service, meditates on Krishna's universal form, the Virat Rupa. And it's also explained in this chapter that the Vedic sounds, Vedic knowledge is so bewildering that even Lord Brahma can't figure it out. So even just if Krishna just gives the Vedas, here's all the instructions for everything you need to know about how the universe works, how to become happy, how to transcend the material energy, everything is here, right? But if all we get is that textbook, even that is not sufficient, right? So Krishna has to give realization also. Otherwise, the Vedas are so complicated and give so many different directions how to understand, how to synthesize it. And even in Srila Prabhupada's books, which are just, the cream of the Vedas, right? We don't have to deal with the whole pantheon. We just have that one little slice. Even there, all of us, I'm sure, have had the experience of reading an instruction in one place and reading what seems to be a different instruction in another place, and how to synthesize it, right? So our own minds are not sufficient. And in fact, Prabhupada says in this purport, it's not erudite scholarship, it's not intellectual attainment that helps us understand these instructions. What is it? It's service. It's devotional service, right? Because what we're looking for is not an intellectual understanding of this material, but we're looking for the realization of how to apply this material in our own lives, and that comes from Krishna. It comes from Krishna through his devotees for most of us, right? But it comes from Krishna in the first instance. Now, in this particular verse, there are two main themes, okay? And the first theme is what I've just been saying, that knowledge is revealed by Krishna, right? Lord Brahma is inspired from within his heart by Lord Krishna's instructions. And he passes that knowledge on down the disciplic succession to us, right? And when that disciplic succession is broken, Krishna comes and reestablishes it. So ultimately, Krishna is the authority. It's described here that there are two paths one can take to transcendence, either the direct path through devotional service or the indirect path through the Vedas, okay? And the second theme, which we've also touched on, is that in order to understand these instructions, we must have a higher authority, right? And it must come to us through the disciplic succession so that we are taking that higher authority. I once knew a man who came to our temple many, many years ago. And he said that he read Srimad Bhagavatam once a year, every year. He had done so, for probably 20 years. And so we gave him the opportunity to speak to a small group of devotees. And I was just appalled to hear what he was saying, because although he, quoted the verses correctly, his explanation of the verses was just, it wasn't even Mayavad, it was just complete concoction. It was crazy. And so I spoke with him a little more after that, and I asked him, kind of gently, well, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport here, so how do you reach your conclusion? And he said, well, I read the verses every year, but I never read the purports. That takes too long, And I realized, okay, so reading the verses, you don't understand the meaning, Even Lord Brahma, without Krishna's inspiration, without, Krishna's internal revelation, he can't understand. So what to speak of us? And this is actually maybe a mercy that we take for granted. I know that I certainly do, because we have such access to Krishna's words and to Srila Prabhupada's purports. And Srila Prabhupada has synthesized in his purports all of the Vaishnava commentators who came before him. So we have this wealth of knowledge, and explanation and ability to penetrate deeply into the meaning of Krishna's words. Just 50 years ago, 60 years ago, that was completely unavailable to people outside a very, very small sliver of the fortunate who studied Vaishnava literatures. And that even in India, it was rare for that to be available, you know? So here we can read this every day. And I find myself taking that for granted and maybe even being a little uninspired, you know, to read the Bhagavatam again, you know. But actually, this is great mercy for us. So meditating on this idea that, yes, we actually have to have an authority. We actually have to have a guide, an instructor to understand this knowledge made me think about when I was in law school, you know, a million years ago. Most of the people who go to law school have intellectual type of brains. And also most people in law school are used to having been academically successful, because if you aren't, you're not inspired to go to law school usually, right? So all of us show up and we are convinced that we can figure things out and we can, you know, our brains are going to be sufficient to get us through this course of study. And law school professors are a little bit sadistic, right? So at least when I went to law school in the US, the way they teach law is not by telling you what principles you're supposed to be learning. Rather, they give you the case law and the statutes, and you have to figure out what the principle is. And this was one of the hardest things for me in my life, one of the most devastating things for my false ego. And also, I think for many of my classmates, because it's very difficult to figure out what the principle of a complicated document is if somebody doesn't tell you in advance, you know. And I spent the first semester thinking, boy, I'm just a failure. You know, I might as well give up. Life is hopeless. I'm useless. You know, I should just quit. And then an older student clued me in to what everybody learns sooner or later, that there are study guides you can buy, or, you know, sometimes classmates will make them and you can borrow them. And these study guides tell you what are the principles you're supposed to be learning. So then you can read the case law and you can read the statutes and you can understand what the relevant points are amidst all the other discussion of so many other issues, right? And I realized at that point in my life, kind of late, I'm sure other people realized it sooner, that when you have a guide, understanding the world is so much easier. You know, and if you stop and think about it, we always have a guide when we're learning new things, right? But because of false ego, I had been thinking, oh, I'm learning this, I'm figuring this out. And law school was the first place where it, you know, came crashing in on me in a way that I could not avoid. That no, you alone can't do anything. You know, you have to take instruction from somebody somewhere. You have to take guidance. So I met the devotees in my second year of law school. And I like to think that Krishna made that little, you know, arrangement of timing the way he did, because I was then ready to say, yes, I do need a guide. I do need some instruction. I can't figure things out on my own, right? So it's very important for us to remember that we need that guidance. And Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas and our other devotees that we have the fortune to associate with, all of them are available to give us that guidance. One of the important things about reading spiritual literatures and about the way we live our lives is understanding what is the point that I'm supposed to be learning. What is the lesson? That's what I had to learn in law school when I would read a case opinion that a judge had written. What is the point I'm supposed to be learning? Then I can go through and pick out all of the points in this document that are addressing that point that I'm supposed to be learning. But if I don't know what the point I'm supposed to be learning is, I'm just lost, right? And that's how most of us, especially, you know, materialists, how we go through life, that we don't know what the point of life is, right? Until we meet the devotees. We think the point of life is to become materially happy, to become materially successful, to become wealthy, to become famous, whatever. You know, I certainly did. I thought that the point of my life was to become wealthy and to become, you know, prestigious and renowned, right? And in my journey towards that goal, what I saw is all these people who were wealthy and had prestige and were very renowned and who were very miserable, right? So when I met the devotees, I was kind of beginning to doubt that that was actually the purpose of life. And when we meet the devotees, we learn that the purpose of life is to reestablish our relationship with Krishna. We learn that we are actually part and parcel of Krishna, created for the very purpose of having a relationship with him, and that we can't be happy, really meaningfully and eternally happy, until we reestablish that relationship, right? So here we are, all of a sudden, the goal of life is turned upside down. And this is really important, because when we make decisions, when we choose to do things or not do things, it's based on what we think the goal is, right? My husband had an interaction with Bhakti-tirtha Swami that really changed the course of our lives. When Bhakti-tirtha Swami was getting ready to depart this world, my husband went to, take leave of him to say goodbye. And he was, at that time, we were living away from the devotees, a couple of hours away from the devotees. We were doing some home programs, but really kind of, not situated peacefully. We felt that something was missing from our lives. And my husband was really trying to get some direction from Maharaj on, what is it that we're doing wrong? What should we be doing differently? And Maharaj just kept telling him, keep the goal in mind. And my husband would say, okay, but Maharaj, should we? And Maharaj would interrupt him and say, keep the goal in mind. And that's the only instruction he would give, just keep the goal in mind. So my husband left. And for months, he was contemplating this instruction. What does that mean, Maharaj? What does that mean? But as he meditated on it, he started thinking, okay, well, the goal is to become Krishna conscious. And how do we do that? Well, we do that through devotional service. And how do we do that? And the situation we were in, where we had a house and we had jobs and we were feeling like we're stuck in this place, doing these home programs, and that's all we can do because we can't see any way out. When he started thinking about, okay, keep the goal in mind. The goal is to increase the service. The goal is to increase the preaching. The goal is to get more association or whatever. Suddenly, we started seeing opportunities to make changes that we hadn't seen before. Those opportunities were there all along, right? But because we were looking at the goal of maintaining financial stability and maintaining, maintaining these properties that we had acquired, or, whatever we thought the goal was, we'd let these little goals get in the way of the big goals. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having those little goals. They're fine. We have families, we have to maintain them. We have to do the prudent things sometimes. But we had let those little goals take too much priority, and they were interfering with the big goal. And when we just suddenly realized, okay, wait, we're prioritizing the wrong things, suddenly everything opened up and we're able to move back to a devotee community. My husband's able to take up full-time service again. And Maharaj could have told us, sell this, move here, do this, but he didn't have to. All he had to do was say, keep the goal in mind, and then everything became clear. So that's part of why it's so important to read, and why the study of the Vedas is so important, because the world we live in will tell us over and over and over, the goal is to become materially satisfied, right? And if you're not materially satisfied, boy, have we got some solutions for you. Just sign up over here and we can sell you all kinds of things that will make you materially satisfied, right? So we have to also put into our minds that information that, no, that's not the goal. Here's what the real goal is, right? And so we always need to be keeping that goal in mind. So the material energy works by telling us that satisfying our sense desires is going to make us happy, right? The purport talks about the weakness of heart is material desire, and the problems of material existence come from this weakness of heart. Because once we start thinking that, yes, this is the problem and this is what I need to solve, right, then we're off track, right? Once we start thinking that I can become happy by rearranging the material energy in some way, right, then we're on the wrong path. Devamrita Swami always likes to ask, and this came from Prabhupada, but I mostly hear it from Devamrita Swami. How many of us pray for unhappiness? Right? Nobody prays for unhappiness. Why would you? And it's going to come anyway. And he says it's the same thing with material happiness. We think we're becoming materially happy because of our arrangements, because I've done this and I was rewarded in this way, and I've manipulated the material energy, and now I'm receiving the reward of happiness. But actually, we're receiving the reward of our karma. It would have come anyway, right? We would have had so much material happiness and so much material distress in this life, because that's the nature of the material energy. We don't have to endeavor for material happiness. It's going to come, just like material distress. What we have to endeavor for is spiritual consciousness. Right? So this desire to control the material energy, that's what gets us into the material world. We then become attached to the material energy, and we start endeavoring for sense gratification. Right? And that's what gets us into trouble. So it's really important to always maintain that consciousness that this is not the goal. This is not what I'm seeking. And it's, in a sense, we're all addicted to the material energy, right? And there are certain kinds of addictions that you can just cut off. Like if you're a drug addict, okay, well, you just stop taking drugs. You eliminate them from your life. And that's a fairly easy way to deal with addiction, right? You just cut something off. It's no longer a factor in your life. But we can't do that with the material energy, right? We live in the material world. We have to interact with the material energy every day, right? So we also have to be reminding ourselves and taking shelter and, doing our sadhana, because if we don't, we're going to become more and more entangled. So this chapter starts with 5 verses, and those 5 verses give us the process for dealing with the material energy, or a process for dealing with material energy, kind of a little checklist that we can use to protect ourselves, right? And in the first 5 verses, we're told in the first verse that Lord Brahma, who is our superior, right? He has qualifications that we will never be able to accomplish in this lifetime anyway. But he still falls into ignorance. He still becomes forgetful, right? And that's how powerful the material energy is. And so he meditates on Krishna's universal form, on the Virat Rupa, starting at the feet and moving up. So this is a process we can emulate, right? Devotees model for us how we can take shelter of Krishna, how we can protect ourselves from the material energy. And so this is one of the things we learn. The 3rd verse says we should have a reluctance to enjoy the material energy, right? We should be a little bit hesitant. We should be a little bit scared of Maya, right? The next verse says that we should minimize the necessities of life and don't unnecessarily increase the necessities of life. That can be really challenging. That can be really tricky. Spiritual life is about balance, right? Again, it's not this all or nothing where we can just renounce the material energy, right? It's about balance. If you live in this world, we have to meet necessities to some degree, right? And if you have a family, clearly you have a responsibility. You have to provide the material necessities for your family. But how much is necessary? How much is unnecessary? The reason why I'm emphasizing this point is because it requires constant awareness. And this is one of the challenges that I find in spiritual life, because I like to get into a groove where something's working and then just go on automatic pilot, right? I'll just keep doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this. I don't have to think about it. Spiritual life doesn't actually work that way, right? It's always about balance. And we always have to be a little bit aware of, am I leaning too far into the material energy? Am I, maybe being artificially renounced or forcing my family to be artificially renounced? It requires a constant awareness and a constant assessment. And that's one of the reasons why reading is so important, because reading reminds us, oh yeah, I need to be paying attention to these things, right? And especially, I don't know the audience here, but I'm assuming that most of you are grihastas, right? And so, we're working full time, we're out in the world, we're busy, we're doing things, and it is easy to get off track. It is easy to have our attention pulled away from the goal of life. So it's important to keep hearing and keep reading so that we are constantly reminded and constantly doing those checks. Another point is that we need to be honest and authentic, at least with ourselves, right? And that can be a little bit difficult, I know, for me. My false ego wants to believe that I'm really good at Krishna consciousness, that I'm really making advancement, that I'm a good example, or, whatever. And it can be a little bit painful to my false ego for me to really do an honest assessment of where I am, that I'm, maybe struggling in a certain way, or maybe not being as committed or as sincere as I could be. And I just want to remind us that, even Lord Brahma, he struggles with the material energy, right? He becomes forgetful. He becomes dissatisfied with his position, right? There's that pastime where, Lord Brahma is feeling, so important, right? And Krishna shows him there are so many Lord Brahmas in so many universes, right? So even Lord Brahma can, fall victim to this idea that having a material position, having some power or some renown is important, and forget that, no, actually, no one is anything compared to Krishna, right? So when we see these things in ourselves, we don't have to feel, which I tend to do, feel ashamed, like I'm such a terrible person, or I need to cover this up and hide it so that no one else can see it because it's so shameful. No, actually, that's how the material energy works. She tricks us, she tricks Lord Brahma. So how are we going to, to escape unscathed? We're not. The key is to see it when it's happening and then just course correct. Yeah. Oh, Krishna, yes, I'm getting puffed up again. Please help me. Because it's going to happen. And if we think it's not going to happen, that's when we're really in trouble. Okay. All right. One other point. I often struggle with the idea of how much material resource, how much material facility is too much, how much is enough. And this is something my husband has told me that I find very helpful, which is that it's not so much the absolute amount of stuff you have, because some devotees, they're very wealthy, they're born wealthy, they become wealthy without a whole lot of endeavor. And so they live at a higher standard of living than I do. And some devotees are much more austere, much more pious, and they live at a lower standard of living. It's not the absolute standard of living, it's the consciousness, right? If we have a great deal of material facility and we're using it for Krishna's service, then there's no problem. If we don't have much, but we're completely dedicated to Krishna's service, again, there's no problem. And so what my husband always says is, it's not that you have to do without. Krishna may send, you may never have to do without, right? But you have to be willing to do without. So we do our duty, we make the endeavor. If the material facility comes, then we use it to the best of our ability in Krishna's service. But if it doesn't come, we still remain in Krishna's service. That's the key. So I hope that's helpful for you, because it's helpful for me. At the end of the purport here, Srila Prabhupada is talking about the 4th chapter of Gita. And I thought it was worth kind of reviewing some important points from that chapter, because that chapter is also talking about how we understand transcendental knowledge. In the 11th verse of that chapter, Krishna says, Yeyatamam prapatyante tams tataiva bhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartante manusha partha sarvasaha. Which the verse is, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects. And sometimes, we can kind of take that to mean that no matter what we're doing, it's according to Krishna's will, which is not actually what that means. What Krishna is saying is that there is a path, there is a process, and to the extent that we link into this process, we're going to go closer to him, right? But if we don't want to link into this process, if we want to be engaged in the material energy, we can be engaged in that process as well. Krishna has established both of these, right? Just as Krishna has said, or we are told that Krishna has established this direct and indirect process. So we have choices. That's the point. We have choices. Krishna is giving us the opportunity to decide how we want to move towards him, how quickly, how directly, or even if we want to move away from him, he'll facilitate that also. But happiness comes from our relationship with Krishna. That's really the point of all of this, is our relationship with Krishna. One of the ways I think about this is in terms of how things operate on us, whether we accept them or not. In other words, Krishna says, this is the way the world works. You can move towards me by these processes, or you can choose to move away from me, and this is going to be the result. Maya is going to be stronger than you are, and you're going to have these experiences. Krishna has laid it all out for us, right? And sometimes we hear people say, well, I don't believe in that, right? Well, whether you believe in it or not is not the point, because that's the way the material world operates, right? And I'm staying with my daughter right now, and she has a 14-month-old baby, my granddaughter. And of course, as a grandmother, I'm, delighted, right, to observe this baby. And one of the things babies that age do is everything you give them, they drop on the floor, because they become fascinated by the process of gravity. Right? If you hold something out and you let go of it, it will fall every time. It will always fall down to the ground. It never goes up in the air, right? It always hits the ground. And it struck me that my granddaughter, she has no idea what gravity is. She doesn't understand the process. She doesn't, quote unquote, believe in it, right? But she can observe it happening, right? And when she's older, someone will explain the concept to her, and it will fit her observations, and she will be able to say, oh yes, of course, that makes sense. I accept that. And then she will, quote unquote, believe in gravity, right? But gravity exists whether she understands it or believes in it or not. And it's exactly the same way with these processes that Krishna is giving us. Whether we accept them, whether we believe in them, they are what they are. They work the way they work. And so if we're sane, right? If we're intelligent, we're going to say, okay, gravity exists. I see that, when I drop this thing, it falls to the ground. So possibly I should not jump off the sofa. A little bit tenuous for a baby to make that connection, but at least as adults, we should be able to see that when we see how the world works, when we know how the world works, we should avoid those things which are going to cause us pain, right? And so Krishna is telling us, look, this is how the world works. This is what happens with the material energy. And honestly, it fits with our experience, right? Arjuna comes to Krishna not in strength and not as a conquering hero, right? He isn't out there on the battlefield going, wow, I am just so psyched and ready to do this here. He comes distressed, right? He comes doubtful. He comes confused. Because that's what the material energy does to us. Because each and every one of us, at some point in our life is going to experience those feelings, because that's the nature of the material energy. So when Arjuna comes to Krishna in that way, all of us go, yes, that fits my experience. I understand where he's coming from. I have been there. And then when Krishna explains, this is why you're distressed. Because you're looking at things from a material point of view, because you become materially attached to these particular relationships, right? And here's the path to get out of it. Here's how you get rid of that distress, by focusing on spiritual advancement, by focusing on reestablishing your relationship with me, by putting me in the center of your life. That's how you become happy. That's how you become peaceful, right? And so if we're paying attention and if we're a little intelligent, we can say, okay, right, I'm in Arjuna's situation. I'm struggling the way Arjuna struggled. So maybe this advice that Krishna is giving to Arjuna, maybe that's also good for me, you know, and we can take that up. So we have these principles that, you know, the Vedic knowledge is eternal, that there's a direct and an indirect process, that we have to take authority. And so I'm going to add another principle here. And that principle is that Krishna is merciful, right? Because without Krishna, how does Lord Brahma get out of his confusion about how to even create the universe, right? Without Krishna, how does Arjuna overcome his doubts? And without Krishna, how do we overcome ours, right? So Krishna, in the same chapter, explains, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glanir Bhavati Bharata, he explains, I come every millennium, whenever there's a decline in religious principles or a rise in irreligion, I come, right? So he gives this knowledge to Lord Brahma, and it's passed down through the disciplic succession. But if that knowledge, you know, becomes broken, as it did 5,000 years ago, or more than 5,000 years ago, Krishna again comes, or he sends his representative, right, to reestablish that, because he's merciful, because he won't leave us here in this hard, difficult place alone. But in this age of Kali Yuga, we get even extra mercy, right? Because Krishna comes and he says, as you surrender to me, I reward you accordingly, right? So follow this path, right? Give up material desire, right? Or stick strictly to this Vedic process, one way or the other, okay? Giving up material desire is extremely difficult, you know, impossible in Kali Yuga, for the most part. Even following the Vedic process in Kali Yuga is extremely difficult, right? Just to stay in the mode of goodness, material goodness in Kali Yuga is very difficult. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes and he breaks open the storehouse of knowledge and then storehouse of love of God, right? So now it's not, oh, you have to follow this difficult process. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was like a drunken man giving out the mercy, right? Here, come and take, come and chant these holy names. Just by chanting these names, just by singing and taking prasadam, just by singing and eating and dancing, you can become liberated from the material energy and you can reestablish your relationship with Krishna, right? So that's even more mercy. And then Srila Prabhupada, right? Prior to Srila Prabhupada, if you wanted access to this storehouse of love of God, you had to go to India. You know, during the pandemic, we all realized like you didn't have to go shopping anymore. You could have everything delivered directly to your home through the glories of Amazon and other home delivery services, right? Well, Srila Prabhupada is the home delivery service for this transcendental knowledge, right? Because he said, okay, you don't have to come to Mayapur. You don't have to come to Nadia. You know, you don't have to come to India. Just stay where you are and we will bring this knowledge to you, right? And so this is the potent manifestation of how much Krishna loves us, right? And this is something that I have to think about often because I do find myself getting discouraged and I do feel sometimes like this is too hard for me and that the material energy will never I want to say she will never release her grip on me, but the real truth is I will not release my grip on her, right? She's not the one holding on, I am, you know, but I struggle, you know, and I'm discouraged and I'm disappointed in myself, right? You know, but I have to meditate on the fact that Krishna wants us to come back so much that he's saying, here's the process. Here's a less intense process. Okay, those don't work for you. Here's Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, just chant the holy names. You still can't get it, fine. Here's Srila Prabhupada and his followers, and they will come and track you down, you know, and hold your hand while you walk through this process, because that's how much Krishna loves us. So when we're struggling, at least when I'm struggling, it helps me sometimes to look at this 4th chapter of the Gita, because there's some checklists in there. There's a couple of checklists in there that I like to look at. And one is the negative one, all right? and it talks about the things we have to be freed from. And this is in the 10th verse. Okay, we have to be freed from anger and from attachment and from fear, right? And those three all work together. You know, Krishna explains in the 2nd chapter how we contemplate the objects of the senses and we become attached, and then we become lustful, and then we become angry. And when we become angry, you know, we're deluded, our memory becomes bewildered, and the next thing we know, we've fallen down, right? We lose our intelligence and we fall down. And I find for myself, it's the anger and the attachment aren't overt, right? They're there, but what I'm really experiencing is fear, anxiety, right? And this world is a place of chronic anxiety. And why am I anxious? Well, I'm anxious because I have attachments and I'm afraid that they're going to be interfered with, and I'm not going to get the material outcomes I desire, right? So when I feel that anxiety, that's a sign to me that, okay, something's off track, right? You know, you need to reassess how you're approaching your life, and are you keeping the goal in mind, and are you remembering to do the daily practices, and to take, not just to do the daily sadhana, but to take shelter of the sadhana. You know, I can spend, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, you know, I can spend a great deal of time chanting and not hearing, or reading and not absorbing, right? Or doing some active service, but my mind is a million miles away. So that practice of being present for our sadhana is really important. But that's, you know, that's one checklist that I can look at and say to myself, okay, you know, am I getting off track? One example that I find helpful to think about is Duryodhana. And I say this because a lot of times we think of attachment in terms of material objects, right? And I mean, we all have some material objects we're attached to, but I think by and large, devotees are not so much attached to material objects, but we do become attached to more subtle things, right? And Duryodhana is a good example of somebody who's so attached to, right? He has a great deal of power and material opulence. You know, he's one of a very small handful of people in a family that's ruling the world, right? And when he's told, look, you can divide the kingdom with the Pandavas, that's not good enough for him. It's not good enough for him to be 50% of the world leadership, right? And at another point, they even tell him, okay, look, just give us 5 villages. So it's like for him to have 99.9% of the prestige and power is not good enough, right? He has to have 100% of it, right? And ultimately, you know, a big part of the fratricidal war at Kurukshetra comes about because Duryodhana can't handle being laughed at by Draupadi, right? His resentment starts when he's in the Pandavas' hall and he mistakes the water for the floor, right, or the floor for the water, and Draupadi just kind of spontaneously laughs at him. And any, you know, mature person, we think, oh, we could just shrug that off. But he's so attached to power and prestige that goes deep into his heart, and he can't forget it, you know. And then he you know, he becomes so focused on overcoming the Pandavas, and we have the whole scene in the gambling hall where he's determined to degrade Draupadi, and all of this culminates, you know, out of this man's false ego, because he's so attached to power and prestige that he can't let a little thing go, right? And I am in some ways embarrassed to admit, but in some ways, you know, just kind of accepting as a factor of the material energy, I relate to Duryodhana on that level, right? I relate to that need for prestige and honor and being recognized, right? And his example shows me how dangerous those desires are. So when I'm looking at this anger and fear and attachment, you know, I remind myself to look underneath and think, okay, where is my false ego getting pushed? Because that's, for me, that's usually where, you know, the real struggle comes. It's not, you know, you can take my car, you can take my house, you know, whatever. But don't mess with my false ego, right? you know. So if I keep some awareness of like, where is my false ego being pressed, that helps me to stay a little more centered and a little more Krishna conscious, right? So also in this chapter, this 4th chapter of Gita, there's a positive checklist, right? And so we're told that, you know, what we strive to be is the person who accepts gains that come of their own accord. In other words, we do our duty and we're satisfied with whatever Krishna sends, free from duality. So we're straightforward, right? We're honest, we're authentic. We're not envious, right? Envy is a waste of time, right? Krishna gives different things to different people because that's what they need. Each and every one of us is getting an individualized education plan directly from Krishna, right? So if my path is different from yours, that's because my path is exactly what I need and your path is exactly what you need, right? So envy is really just a waste of time. To be steady in success and failure, that's a challenging one, right? So many times I will interpret a perceived failure, right, as an indictment of my value as a devotee. You know, sometimes we attempt to do a service and it doesn't work out the way that we had anticipated. I'm terrible at organizing conferences, terrible at it, always have been. And yet somehow I often find myself in that situation. So in February, I was organizing a Vaishnavi conference, and it just was, again, another disaster, right? And Krishna mercifully caused me to become ill at the very last minute, and someone else had to step in and take over, and they managed to pull, you know, success from the chaos that I had created. But as we were approaching the conference, I was realizing that I had again created chaos, you know, and I was just feeling like such a failure and such a fool. And I did need to learn the lesson that, you know, let someone else do these things that you're not good at. But I also had to remember that every devotee faces setbacks. You know, everything doesn't work out perfectly every time. And we see that with the Pandavas. Look at what they had to go through. They're the beloved friends of Krishna who never wavered in their desire to serve him, you know, or their acceptance of his supremacy. They are perfect devotees, right? And they still go through hard times and they still struggle. And Arjuna still became depressed and despondent, right? So when these things happen, it's not an indictment of us as devotees. It's simply the nature of the battle we do with the material energy, right? And the important thing is to remember how to respond to those situations, how to respond by, you know, emulating Arjuna and going to Krishna for help, you know, and saying, you know, reading his Gita and saying, okay, Krishna, what do you want me to do now? By taking shelter of the devotees, by taking shelter of the holy names. So the last part of this particular chapter, Srila Prabhupada talks about faith. And he says that the faithful man is qualified, is eligible to receive this transcendental knowledge. And in the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada explains what he means by faith. He says the faithful man believes firmly in Krishna, and he thinks that simply by acting in Krishna consciousness, he can achieve the highest perfection. Right? And another way of thinking about that is trust the process. In other words, Krishna's given these two processes, direct and indirect, for achieving the spiritual realm. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us the simplified process, direct process of taking shelter of the holy names and engaging in devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada has given us the specific 16 rounds and 4 regular principles and all of this. So if we trust that this process will take us where we want to go, that's the faith that we have to have. And I know that for me, a lot of times I forget that that's the process, and I start thinking that, oh, you know, I can solve all my material problems. I can become happy, eternally happy by this material arrangement or that material arrangement. Let me move here. You know, I remember when I was a young devotee praying to get married, you know, which of course, natural and something that I'm glad I did, and I think I should have done. But I remember, this very, very fierce desire, thinking that, if I could just get married, my devotional life would be perfect, right? All of the struggles I was having with my spiritual life would be solved, right? When I was very young, I think I was about 6 years old, I remember having this desire to eat an orange, and my mother not thinking it was an appropriate time for me to be eating an orange, and me begging her and begging her. And at one point I told her, if you give me this orange, I will never ask you for anything else again in my life, right? And even as a 6-year-old, as I said that statement, I knew it wasn't true. And there was a part of my mind that's saying, why are you saying this? That's not true. You're going to ask for something again. But this material desire for this orange was so potent and so strong, right? That I just felt like I had to have that orange at that moment, and I would do anything, promise anything to get it, right? And so even as an adult, sometimes I have, this perception that, oh, if I could just get this one thing, if this one circumstance could just work out, right? And so to remember that these feelings aren't real, this perception is not real, right? And instead of making my choices, taking action based on that perception, to remember that, okay, this transcendental process, this life that Srila Prabhupada has given, these instructions that Srila Prabhupada has given, these are the way to happiness. And if I make my choices based on that perception, that's faith. That's going to get me to the right direction. And so Krishna, we read the scriptures, we read Srila Prabhupada's purports, we discuss with the devotees, and we still may not have realization, right? Because the realization comes from Krishna. But by doing all of these things, we prepare ourselves. We open the channel so that Krishna can give us those realizations. Prabhupada also says that this faith comes through devotional service and taking shelter of the holy names. So these are the processes, what we have these processes that we've been given that are going to take us back to Godhead. We have to have faith in those processes, right, in order to take them up and stick with them for a lifetime. And through devotional service and through taking shelter of the holy names, we get that faith. And I'll just conclude by sharing a little anecdote. This is in the book Bond of Love, which is a collection of memories of all of Srila Prabhupada's Vaishnavi disciples, which you can find on Amazon if you're interested. But there's one where a Vaishnavi describes how she really did not feel connected to Srila Prabhupada when he was on the planet. She never had the chance to meet him. She never got a letter from him, had no personal interaction with him. And she said that when he left the planet, all of the devotees around her were heartbroken and really suffering. And she felt guilty because she didn't feel so affected, right? But she knew that going out on Sankirtan was something that pleased Srila Prabhupada. And she also really disliked going out on Sankirtan. It was really difficult for her. She didn't have the nature of a person who naturally wanted to talk to strangers. She didn't naturally want to sell things. But she kept doing it because it was pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. And she said that over the years, by engaging in this service with the goal of pleasing Srila Prabhupada, even though she felt disconnected from him at the beginning, although she was his disciple, over the years, through engaging in that practice, she became closer and closer and closer to him. And she said that, today she feels like Srila Prabhupada is with her all the time, that she never feels separated from him for even a moment, right? And so by engaging in these processes, by chanting the holy names, by taking up service, by making some sacrifice of our time and energy for Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya, we get that relationship, we get that connection, we get that faith, and that will carry us, right? Because as I said, it's difficult. It's difficult in this material world to overcome Krishna's energy. Krishna says, this energy of mine, it's impossible to overcome. But if you take shelter of me, I'll carry you through it, right? So again, transcendental knowledge comes from Krishna. we require authority to understand it. Krishna within our heart can give us realization. And if we trust this process that we've been given, we take shelter of this process, all of these things will happen. Thank you so much for your kind attention. I would love to hear questions, comments, corrections.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Mother Radha Devi. That was a very beautiful explanation you gave to the text. And I have a couple questions, but we'll first go to Miss Gail. Please unmute and go ahead to speak, Miss Gail. Hare Krishna, Gail, are you there?
Oh yeah, I don't know, somehow I got muted and unmuted. Anyway, yeah, Hare Krishna, Mother Radha.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if I understood one of your points properly. So as you were saying, this is the material world, so sometimes despondency is there. You gave your own example, you gave Arjuna's example, right? So it's not that we should expect to not fall into despair or despondency, periodically, but because that's just the nature of this world, right? Instead, when those times do come, we should simply turn to devotional service to the best of our ability, something like that. Or how would you have put it?
Well, let me clarify too that, we can be despondent for a whole lot of reasons, right? I personally suffer from an anxiety disorder. And so, I can, it's a biochemical thing, right? And if I don't pay attention to my biochemical needs, right, it can overwhelm me. I'm not saying that we don't pay attention to our, material requirements. Sometimes devotees put themselves in an artificially renounced situation, right? Give up everything and live in a hut,
Yeah.
in the middle of the jungle, right? And then become despondent because they're not actually, qualified to live such an austere life. So we do have to take care of our material necessities, right? Take care of our health and all of those things. But ultimately, those are things that stabilize us. And then once we're stabilized, we think, okay, now what do I do? Now, the goal of life, the way to move forward is this transcendental process. Sometimes we mistake the stabilizing force for the solution, and it's not.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Ms. Gail, for the question, and thank you, Ms. Radha Devi, for the answer. Anyone else with any question or comment? Well, rather, one of my first questions will be this question I have, which probably is in line with Ms. Gill's question and the answer you gave. And that is, when you were speaking, you made reference to His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj.
Yes.
Who once asked, does anyone actually pray for unhappiness? Which of course nobody does, but unhappiness comes our way anyway. And therefore, happiness will also come without our endeavor. Now, as conscious living beings, human beings in particular, we know that there are certain things that are necessities, like food to eat. And if you live in the city where you are not in the forest, you can cultivate a small piece of land. If you live in the city, you have to, in order for you to eat, you have to earn money. Therefore, you have to work. And in order for you to work, you have to study yourself, what you can do and how you can do it. And therefore, people go to school. Like you were talking about yourself, you were you were doing lower because you sat down and you stated that if I do this, I'm going to be able to help myself and help others. Now, if somebody just sits down and begins to think that, well, why do I have to struggle so much about going to school and doing this or doing that? I'm going to be able to take care of my family anyways. Then what happens to that individual? And so what I'm trying to ask is, how do we understand when Srila Prabhupada also said it, and the Ramita Maharaj also repeating it using different analogies, that we do not pray for miseries, but miseries come our way anyway. Therefore, happiness, we do not need to pray for. We do not have to make like conscious effort to live in such a way that there will be happiness, but there will be happiness anyway. But if we live that way, how likely are we going to be truly live in this world in such a manner that we have the peace of mind to take care of our material needs and spiritual needs? How do we understand and approach this situation? Hare Krishna.
That's a really good question, and again, this is one of these places where maturity and realization are so important, because you're talking about balance. I think I said before that spiritual life involves balance, right? So this idea that, we don't have to work, we don't have to endeavor, right? That was kind of prevalent when I was a young devotee, at least in the temples where I was in America, that, you just do service for Krishna and you don't worry about anything else, because, that's all we have to think about, which is fine if you're single, you don't ever plan on getting married and having children. But then people start getting married and having children, and all of a sudden, yeah, you do have to worry about those things. And Krishna says in the 3rd chapter of Gita that, you have to work. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, right? So it's not that we can be lazy or use Krishna consciousness as an excuse, just hide out in the ashram, hide out in the temple, and, I don't know. That's not what Krishna is asking of us, right? And as far as exactly where that line falls, it depends on the person. For me, going to law school was just kind of natural. It made a lot of sense given my personality and my inclinations. For somebody else, it wouldn't make any sense at all. But one thing I will say that my husband and I have seen, because I think maybe we balanced a little too far in the not endeavoring for material necessities, and we're at retirement age now. And what I see is that devotees who were a little more thoughtful in planning ahead have more facility for doing service now. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, I'll just, minimize everything all the time and never accumulate anything, and that will be the best. It doesn't hurt to think about what am I going to do in my later years of life, and to have the financial freedom to do full-time service, right? Yeah. So,
Well,
again, I think that's one of those reasons why we always have to be paying attention, right? To figure out what is the best thing to do in this moment.
well, thank you so much. You also talked about the importance of authorities, and you were making a reference to Lord Brahma himself, the main architect of this material universe. As intelligent and intellectual as he is, he also became forgetful of Krishna. And he had to take instructions from the Supreme Lord, which eventually was passed on to Lord Brahma and RADHA. And so we have this parampara system. Now, as we try to follow the authorities, and we have authorities everywhere in the purport. Prabhupada was talking about there are authorities. The materialists are also following authorities. So as spiritualists, we're also trying to follow authorities. Now, what happens when you have an authority that you're following, and the authority somehow derails from the truth and the perspective that Krishna has? And as a follower, when you realize that the authority you follow is derailing or has derailed, what do you do?
Yeah, and again, a very, very important question. You know, we're taught Guru Shastra and Sadhu, right? Because any individual person, even Lord Brahma, becomes bewildered. So what to speak of a devotee, you know, who's simply trying to serve Srila Prabhupada? Anybody can become bewildered for some period of time. Srila Prabhupada's never going to let us down, right? You know, so we always can measure what we're being told against what Srila Prabhupada has said. And that idea of sadhu, that a group of devotees, right? It's a reason why we should never think, oh, I have all the answers. I can tell, you know, whatever followers I have, whether that's, you know, devotees at the temple or my children or whatever, that I have all the answers, because no one devotee really does have all the answers. It's the community of devotees, right? And we do see sometimes that our authorities become off. And I like to think, you know, when you're a small child, you expect your parents to know everything and do everything right. And sometimes even when our parents are not right, we think they are because they're our parents. And we go around telling the other kids, oh, your parents don't know anything. My parents do things the right way, right? You know, I think as young devotees, sometimes we expect our authorities to be like that. And as then we become teenagers and we realize our parents don't know anything and we want to rebel against them. And then when we become adults, we see, oh, actually, they're not perfect. They don't know everything, but they have a great deal of wisdom. You know, and I think that's the perspective we should bring to working with other devotees, whether they're senior to us, you know, in the hierarchy or not. That, you know, yes, they have a great deal of wisdom, but they are also humans. And, you know, there may be from time to time some discrepancy. When we get into righteous indignation, how dare you have a flaw? How dare you not be perfect? You know, and then we feel like we're entitled to rebel or, you know, criticize. Then we're being teenagers, you know, we're being immature.
Thank you for the answer. Okay, Miss Gail, please unmute. It might be a continuation to what we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to thank you so much for having made the statement that you just did, Mother Radha, because I do feel that sometimes, you know, we tend to have a kind of oversimplistic way of viewing, especially senior devotees. You know, for example, as soon as we see somebody in saffron robes, it's like we feel like they must be omniscient, you know, and confuse them with God, you know, when, you know, they are human beings. You know, they may be very elevated souls, but, you know, I feel like sometimes we assume to know more about the person than we do based on externals, you know, and so that's why I'm happy that you said what you said.
Yeah, it's quite a burden to be expected to be perfect and know everything. It's a lot to put on somebody.
Yeah. And the result for those of us who are expecting that, you know, can be disastrous, actually.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely a fact.
Well, thank you, Miss Gail, for that continuation. But Mother Radha, if you wouldn't mind, there is a question in the chat room that I would
Yeah.
like to read for you to consider.
Okay.
It's coming from Mitravinda Devi. So she writes, material energy is also created by Sri Krishna. Isn't it true that material energy is not separate from Krishna? How can we have a truly balanced perspective in understanding this while serving, yet not ignoring or accepting dualities from those who use position and material energy in a way that is not reflective of right deeds? And she goes further to write, the youth are watching this imbalance while watching people strive for material energy as an aspect of Krishna, while telling them that material energy is bad. Please elaborate.
So the material energy is Krishna's energy, absolutely. And the material energy is not bad. The material energy is just stronger than we are, right? So when we engage with the material energy, seeking to control the material energy, to use the material energy for our sense gratification, we are in deep trouble because that energy is stronger than we are, and we are entangled. We've just, swum into the net, right? And we're not going to find happiness, right? But when we use that energy in Krishna's service, then that energy is spiritualized. Then we are in a relationship with that material energy that's different, but it's a spiritual relationship. Prabhupada talks often about wanting to use the property of God without recognizing God, right? That's the problematic area. So I think for some of our youth, it gets presented as either you engage with the material energy in this way that is completely spiritual and you only use it for Krishna's purposes, or, the material energy is bad and horrible and you have to, kill yourself because there's no other way to, solve this problem. And that's not true either. That's Krishna's point about the indirect path, that there is a way to engage with the material energy, even if we're not pure, completely pure, or even, for some of our youth, that we're not even striving to only use it in Krishna service. Like, I'm not using the material energy solely in Krishna service, but that's my goal. For my daughter, I'm not even sure that's her goal, right? But there's still a way to engage with the material energy so that we can make spiritual advancement. And that's that gradual process that's talked about in this particular section of Bhagavatam. That as a householder, you distribute prasadam, you engage in sacrifice. That's how a householder purifies their material energy. You support the devotees. There's so many ways that we can engage that material energy. And I kind of resonate with this question. I remember when my son was in high school, it seemed like every Bhagavatam class he went to, it was like, don't go to college. It's the slaughterhouse of the soul, right? And so he really absorbed that. Like, I'm not going to college, why would I go to college, and as a mother, you're sitting there thinking, well, okay, fine, but you also have to live in this world. You also have to support yourself and your family. So what is your plan? How are you going to do that? So again, it's that that balance and that synthesizing all of the instructions. So if we're giving our youth the message that, the material energy is bad and to be avoided at all costs, no, that's not the right message. The message should be that the material energy is powerful and something to be very careful of. And there's a process for engaging with that energy.
Well, thank you for the answer, which is, at least to me, very, very satisfactory. We go to His Grace Harichakra Prabhu, please, you may unmute. Harichakra Prabhu, are you there?
Yeah.
All right.
Hare Krishna. If somebody is there, let a person go before me. I need
Okay.
about a minute. Okay.
All right. If anyone has something else to say, otherwise, Mother, when you were speaking, you were talking about people in general, that you were talking about the importance of Krishna's mercy. Krishna is so merciful that whatever one is experiencing in his or her life is what that particular person needs. Now, I would want you to delve a little bit deeper on this, because I've been thinking that whatever one is experiencing in life is what those people deserve. So if you can shed a little bit more light on the difference between what one is going through as a matter of their needs to grow or to learn or to experience whatever, versus they're going through this or that because that is what they deserve. And I'm asking this question because I do not think people who have no access to Krishna consciousness, as some of us do, getting it from Srila Prabhupada, is what they need in life. But I think those who do not have access to Krishna consciousness is what they deserve based on their desires and intentions. But because it is something that they deserve, we could pray to Guru and Krishna to change or make some adjustments to what they deserve, which is contrary to what somebody needs, because if somebody needs it, it's a need, it's a necessity. So if you can shed a little bit more light on what supposedly may be the difference between what we experience in life as a matter of needs or as because we deserve it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. And there's a couple of layers to your question. So first of all, when I was talking about, Krishna's giving each of us an individualized education plan, I was talking about devotees, because we're told that Krishna, once you turn towards him, he takes a personal interest and begins arranging your karma so that you're still getting what you deserve, but you're getting it in such a way that it facilitates you moving forward as quickly as possible. And that's not just for Vaishnavas. Krishna's power, it's not like you have to be wearing tilak for him to, enter into a relationship with you or, begin to arrange your karma. It's the Vaishnava path is going to take you farther more quickly, but there are other processes. Krishna says in that 4th chapter of Gita that I descend everywhere and I give people what they can accept. So he's having relationships with people who are not quote unquote devotees, and he's arranging their karma as well. And, in the fullness of time, he will arrange that they meet the devotees. But when if we haven't turned toward Krishna yet, right? Then we're getting the reactions from our activities, right? But that's also Krishna's mercy, because those reactions force us into distress, and that distress forces us to say, why am I suffering? Why is the world like this? If we didn't get, our deserved quote unquote punishments or reactions, then we'd be satisfied to stay in the material world. And that's not an acceptable solution for Krishna. Krishna will not accept that outcome. So he's created this world in such a way that, Kali's got the trident with the 3 tines. She's always poking, right? Always poking, so that, it's like, wake up, sleeping soul. Ask yourself why you're here and what you can do to get to a better place. So Krishna's mercy is there for everybody, but Krishna doesn't force it on you. So if you want to chase that material energy and you don't want to turn towards Krishna, he's going to let you walk the opposite way on his path. You can walk away from him. And then you just get those periodic reminders that this world is a place of suffering. And eventually that brings you to the point where you're willing to turn around and walk back the other way. But once you turn towards Krishna, then that reciprocation increases. Right? And I know from personal experience, I had never heard of, well, I guess I'd heard of the Hare Krishnas, but I had no idea who they were or what they were about, right? There's just some weird cult in the US back in the 70s. But I knew that something was missing from my life. And I, went to Christian church after Christian church looking for the place where I could, fill this spiritual need, and I couldn't find it. And I kept praying to God, to Jesus, please show me my path. Please show me my path. And I finally met someone who gave me a Bhagavad Gita, and I read the introduction, and I thought, wow, this Prabhupada man, he knows what he's talking about. This is the truth for me. And then somebody told me, oh, this is the Hare Krishnas. And I went, wait, no, what? I can't be a Hare Krishna. They're weird, right? But Krishna was reciprocating with me that whole time. So it wasn't that I had to, sign up or give my email address to a devotee or something before that relationship could take place. It was there. It's just that if you're asking Krishna, please help me come towards you, then you get that, like I said, that personalized.
Well, thank you so much for the answer. Arichakra Prabhu, are you available now? You may unmute, please. It seems Arichakra Prabhu is not available. Anyone else with any question or comment? Ms. Gill, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna again. Yeah, so I just want to again.
Dave, I was coming
okay.
and you.
Okay.
Hold on, let Gail finish. Ms. Gail, finish, please.
Are you sure? I can let him go.
On.
Let him go.
No, go on.
Okay. Yeah, just to confirm again one of your statements. When you were saying that, we are, or I should say, the material energy is stronger than us, especially if we are approaching it in the mood of selfish enjoyment. But would you say, I know that material energy is Krishna's energy, but would it be accurate or inaccurate to say that if we are approaching the material energy in the mood of service, are we stronger than the material energy at that point? Or is it still stronger than us because it's Krishna's energy? What would you say?
She's always stronger than we are. We never control her. If we're using her in Krishna's service, then we won't be materially entangled. But she's still stronger than we are. And without Krishna's sanction, we still can't accomplish anything.
Mm-hmm.
So the material energy, she's always.
Yeah, the reason why I was a little confused about that is because sometimes I hear an analogy, right, where alcohol is like the material energy, and if we approach alcohol to enjoy it, then we become drunk. Alcohol overpowers us. But if we don't take that alcohol, right, then it cannot have its way with us, So yeah, because of that,
not a perfect analogy.
I see.
Because like I said, alcohol is something you can just cut right out of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You can't use alcohol in Krishna's service, right? You can use material energy, big picture in Krishna's service, right?
Yeah, the idea there was that, a person who imbibes alcohol, they're overpowered by alcohol, but it was because they approached it for enjoyment. Whereas a person who doesn't approach it for enjoyment, the alcohol can't have any sway over them.
Right. That's the thing. If we use it in Krishna service, we don't become entangled. We don't become overpowered, but we still don't get to control how the material energy works out, or, it's like Krishna is the controller, the material energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think you touched on what the fine line was. If we use her in Krishna's service, then we are not even though we're not overpowered by her, we are still not more powerful than her.
Right, because, and that's what Krishna says in Gita, that this divine energy of mind consisting of 3 modes of material nature is, impossible to overcome, right? You can't control the material energy. But when we take shelter of Krishna, when we're using the material energy in Krishna's service, Krishna is protecting us from those reactions, from becoming materially entangled. It's not that the material energy has become less powerful than we are. It's that Krishna is the controller of the material energy.
Yeah, he's interceding.
Yes.
So that we don't become entangled.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that was a beautiful distinction. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Ms. Gail. So we go to Hare Chakra Prabhu, and please unmute.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Mata, thank you very much for this elaborate explanation. I mean, sometimes you listen to a class like this, and it's like you are rejuvenated all over again. So thank you very much. Yeah, my question is, you seem to have even answered the major part of my question, but the question I'm asking is that sometimes as people who claim we are doing some devotional service to Guru and Krishna, sometimes we might have the right mindset, but at the same time, we get caught up. Let me first set this example. One devotee was once preaching, and he was telling about this Brahmana, that Brahmana was so like strict with his service. He would chant his Gayatri at the appropriate time. He would chant whatever mantras he needs to chant. He was doing his pujas at the right time. And one time he overslept. And whilst he was sleeping, someone woke him up. And the person woke him up and said, hey, it's time for you to do your puja and chant your Gayatri and this thing. So the Brahmana woke up and quickly arranged all this thing. And so finally the Brahmana asked that person, who are you? And the person said, I'm Maya. And the Brahmana said, if you are Maya, then why did you wake me? And the person said, yeah, because you are always caught up thinking that you are such an exalted devotee because you do everything at the right time. And so you were thinking that, so in order to keep that ego, I wake you up so that you don't miss it. Because if otherwise you will become miserable and your misery will humble you. So I don't want you to. So similarly, sometimes as devotees, like if even we need something and we don't get it, then we tell, even that thing is Maya. We don't like it. It's not like, it's because we were not able to achieve it, then we now say that thing is Maya. And if even we see somebody achieving that goal that we were not able to achieve, then we are, all this is Maya. So can you give a little bit in-depth about situations of that nature?
Yeah. Thank you. I had not heard that story before. I love that story. It reminds me of, Narada Muni when he meditates on Krishna and Krishna, he hears Krishna speak, right? He sees Krishna, right? And then his meditation is broken and Krishna goes away and he repeats the process, does everything exactly the same, but Krishna doesn't appear again. He just speaks to him. That idea that it's not by our rituals, it's not by our endeavor that we perfect our relationship with Krishna. That element of mercy, that element of grace is so important. So while we may, as an offering, as our dharma, as our service, we want to be on time, we want to do everything exactly right, we want to be as pukka as possible, we understand that by doing those things, it's not that Krishna owes us and now we're entitled to anything, right? Krishna, I don't get Krishna consciousness because, I perfected some ritual. It's still, bhakti's causeless. Krishna's mercy, is so important. And again, that idea that if I can't do something, it's not worth doing, or if something didn't work out for me, it's Maya, right? I mean, how much false ego is there in that perception? Right? Krishna is giving each of us exactly what we're supposed to have. And I mean, I admit, sometimes I look at another devotee and I think, yeah, why can't things be that easy for me? Or why can't I, have that experience? Or, and I do feel envious, right? But that's, again, my foolishness, because Krishna is giving me what's right for me and giving them what's right for them. It's very immature to think that the only way to be a devotee is the way that works for me. Right? I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Hare Krishna, thank you so much for everything. And thank you so much, Moderator, for such a very
Okay.
discussion on the topic. And
Thank you all so much for your questions. These are very enlivening questions, very thoughtful audience.
Yeah, sir. Hare Krishna.
Okay, yes, Govinda, probably have something to say, please.
Thank you very much, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
I have a long question, but I just want to make it brief. Why is material energy so strong, so powerful? If Krishna wants all of us back to Godhead, why he made this material energy so powerful, difficult to overcome?
Yeah. Well, we're tiny and Krishna's big is one answer. His energy is inherently big. But also it's the nature of what we asked for. We wanted to come to a place where we could be the center, where we could enjoy, right? So to forget that Krishna is God, to forget that we are his part and parcel, there has to be a very strong, powerful force. Otherwise, we couldn't forget, what it takes to cause us to forget our real identity. That's what we have to overcome. And from our point of view, it's like, Krishna, you're making this so hard. And my daughter used to say, if Krishna wants me to be a pure devotee, why doesn't he just make me a pure devotee? Right? So we can say, oh, Krishna, why are you doing this to me? But that's our perspective, bound by time, thinking that our little setbacks are huge and important. When we go back to Godhead, Prabhupada said, we'll go back there and it'll be like, this was a bad dream. It won't be significant. All of these things that seem so devastating and important and whatever, when we get back to Godhead, they'll just be like, oh, we woke up from a bad dream. No significance at all. So from Krishna's point of view, it's not that hard. It's not taking that long, right? So, and that's part of why we have to have that faith, that stick with this process, even though to our materially conditioned mind, it seems so difficult, but stick with this process because it's going to take us someplace that's so much better than we can imagine.
Well, thank you so much.
So,
Can I just interject?
Yeah, I don't know what let me clear my understanding if I'm really understanding you correctly. Are you saying that because originally we desire to forget Krishna, so he has sent us to a place where we can actually forget him to get our desire fulfilled? And that's why his material energy is so strong?
Yes, I mean, that's the whole reason why we had to leave the spiritual world in the first place. You can't be the controller. You can't be the center if Krishna's right there in your consciousness.
All right, I get it. Thank you.
All right, Miss Gail, something to say? Unmute.
Yeah, I think it was along the same lines. I was going to say that, it's the old story of, is Maya holding on to us or are we holding on to Maya?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think Maya is so beautiful that it's not so easy not to hold on to her. So we just hope and pray that by the power of devotional service, we can disassociate ourselves from Maya.
Hold on to
She's
Krishna.
she's so beautiful, but her kicks are really hard. So the price that we pay for her beauty is not worth it. Yet we, very foolishly keep holding on.
Turn left at the traffic light.
We only say we are foolish after we've been bitten, if we are lucky enough, anyway. But Mother Radha, that has been a very, very beautiful Krishna Katha. And we hope to have your association more and more in this Sangha. So with that being said, we're going to humbly request all the devotees to kindly unmute. And we all chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to express our appreciation of others. Krishna Katha.
65 East.
Jai. Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Hare,
Hare Rama,
Rama,
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Rama Hare,
Vanchaka Patarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha.
Hare
Kirtanam
Divan
Pavanebhyo
Pavanebhyo,
Vaishnavabhyo.
Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha.
the Radha.
Thank you all so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.